Is your organization finding it difficult to achieve compliance and scale its security posture? As G2's highest rated cloud compliance software, Drata streamlines your SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, HIPAA, GDPR, and many more security frameworks, and provides continuous 24-hour control monitoring so you can focus on scaling securely. Drata is also the only compliance automation platform with a private tenant database. That's like having your cake and securing it too. Listeners of Business Security Weekly get 10% off Drata by visiting securityweekly.com/Drata. That's DRATA.
Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Tyler Robinson. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings by visiting securityweekly.com/on-demand. Also, don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to warn you now. We might get to Article 4 and not finish the last two. I'm just saying. I'm warning the viewers now. Article 6 is easy.
Article 5 is really good.
I know it's really good, but I might get on.
4 is going to hang us.
Yeah, 4 is going to hang us. All right. So first article, because there were some setups to this, right? And so I had to do the setup before we got to Article 4. So the first one is talking about the C-suites more. Prioritizing cybersecurity, but we still see increased threats. Like, this isn't a surprise to anybody, right? We've been talking about this for a long time. PwC goes out and does a survey and says, yes, we're getting more serious and prioritizing cybersecurity, which is great for the CISO, great for the organizations, but we know we're still going to have increased threats. Okay, so, all right, what do I do about it, right? And so the one challenge I have out of this article is I don't see a lot of like, okay, now what? But because I think the data we already knew, which is good, but I wanted a little more meat on this article.
Yeah, I mean, it was just identifying that there's that trend that more and more executives are treating cybersecurity as one of their top concerns and top threats to the organization. We all know that threats aren't going to be going away anytime soon. So yeah, that's logical. But yeah, you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, there's no strategic conversation around now. What do you do with that? But from a knowledge perspective, it's good to know that in their survey, at least 2/3 of those executives are considering cybersecurity a top item on their strategic list. I mean, it's hitting number one for 2/3 of executives. Great. Now let's do something about it.
Yeah, let's do something about it.
Does that put us behind though? Like, threats have been an issue for a while. We've gotten to the point where threats are an exponential issue at scale, at quantity, at budget. Now, does that actually put us behind the ball because we're just starting to identify this in 2/3 only? I'm really kind of surprised by that a little bit. Like, I would think.
I mean, just history though. I don't think we've ever seen 2/3 of executives saying this is my top priority, cyber threat, right? No, that's never been the number one on the list for 2/3 of executives that I've seen on any report. So I think, while it's not great, while it's not perfect, we're making traction where you have, 75% of executives saying, all right, I actually need to face the facts on this now and do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a business vertical now that has been obsoleted or able to step outside of the cyber range, right? Like, we are all affected by it, unfortunately and fortunately. But the same token means that many of the traditional verticals that have gotten to the point where they've come up from mom and pop, they've come up from traditional business, industry, all those things, that kind of transition period. I think that's where we're seeing some of that transition. Yes, they know it's important. 2/3 of them are just starting to catch up. The other 1/3 is still probably trying to drag their feet, but at some point the retirement and the progression has to take effect.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, so we're catching up, but you bring up a very good point, Tyler, is that now we're behind, right? So that kind of ties us start a little bit into the next couple articles, which is, the CISO of tomorrow has got to step into this business spotlight, right? We've already known that they're stepping up, and they have to start understanding the business and really understanding business risk. Ties back into the previous discussion we just had with Jeff Pollard from Forrester. This article talks about, okay, now what do I need to do, right? As the CISO stepping into that new spotlight, because more and more people are focused on it, what are the things I have to do as a CISO? And there's some good tips in here, I think, when I look at this, right? I mean, obviously finding the balance between security and the C-suite, right? Like, you can't be the fatalistic person. You have to understand the risk and the probabilistic side from a C-suite perspective. I reuse those terms from the previous segment because I thought they were really interesting ways for CISOs to think about. I can't be fatalistic per se. I have to think about risk and being probabilistic and where can I make traction with the C-suite, with the board, with other executives across the business.
Ultimately, it's partnering with the business. View yourself as a partner, view yourself as a consultant to the business, view yourself as a value-added provider of information to the organization. That's, you're not there to sit back and say, this is going to be the demise of our organization, so we have to do X, Y, Z. You have to have that partnership conversation. Here's the risks I'm seeing. Here are the threats that I'm seeing. Let's build an outcome, right? That's the conversations we need to be having with the business. Otherwise, we're just going to be seen as that old school security team of no, and friction to the business. And we can't. You have to partner. It's the same struggle that the CIO had 20 years ago. You have to have the partnership conversation. Plan together.
That really does mean, like, from a CISO standpoint, we've had to evolve and adapt. We've become more of a hybrid where we're able to do that business intelligence, have the business conversations, really evaluate the risk, have the relationships, right? You've had to shift from becoming just a manager and overseeing an asset or an IT or a department and even people to more of that leadership role where you're actually having to communicate, you're having to bring in the budget, the insight, the foresight, and have the technical aptitude to be able to keep up with what the business risks are and properly articulate that to the business in the business realm.
So 100%.
You tied us right into Article 3, Tyler, right? Because why you need a risk-based approach for this exact reason, right? Security was a lot about compliance in the early days, right? It was compliance, check the box, I have to do it. These are the mandates that are down on top of me. That is blurring the real discussion about how do you manage risk across a business and how do you turn the CISO role into a business leadership role, right? It is all about risk. And in our history of coming out of the compliance side has not helped us mature as fast as we probably needed to.
I think it steered people away from that, right? Like, I think that's one of the reasons most real technical people steered away from that executive level role because of that checkbox compliance and the fight with the business.
Well, because we realized really quickly that check in the box didn't mean we were in a better spot, right? Where it's actually the opposite. Our security strategies and our security programs should be the catalyst for compliance, right? Compliance, those checks in the box should be a byproduct of what we're doing, not the other way around. So, I think we're doing a good job of flipping that mentality now and realizing that those checks and those boxes need to be the outcomes of what we're building and what our strategies are.
Which is why I think we're getting a lot higher caliber, like C-level executives in there. You have the ability to affect change. I mean, at the end of the day, most of us that have been doing this for a very long time, if we haven't burnt out yet, the reason we're still here is because we're able to affect some change. And I think the appeal to be able to get to that executive level now is becoming more and more advantageous to us because it allows us to affect the change. You're right. The checkbox becomes as part of the job and the strategy and the vision and the roadmap. That's what we're after.
And this is going to be my public service announcement because you set it up, Tyler. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. Don't burn out. Don't allow yourself to burn out because it's easy, right? We were talking earlier in the pre-show that, I just spent 5-6 days in Nashville. decompressing, not connecting, making sure that I'm not burning out, right? So public service announcement, don't burn out. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, and I agree with both of you. Now, Tyler, you said something interesting that leads us into what I think will be a long discussion, which is how aspirational is the CISO role after October 5th, 2022? Because I think for me, it changed the way I think about the role personally for me. For those who don't know, obviously, Joe Sullivan was convicted, the Uber CISO, on some charges from the FTC and the government around the Uber breach, right? And I don't want to get into the this and that and the evidence and all this other stuff. I think it sets a really bad precedent for the industry that potentially hampers our ability to bring in the next set of security leaders into the role, because they might get turned off because of the personal potential risk that now is involved in the role. And I think I just think that's a bad thing for us as an industry. I think this whole series of activities that have happened are just makes me rethink, would I ever want to be a CISO? Would I ever want to put my family and myself through something like he just went through? I don't think I would. And I'm curious on your guys' thoughts, because I think this is something that's going to potentially hamper or hurt the industry over time.
So the only thing I'll put out there before we start the conversation was, did Sarbanes-Oxley stop people from wanting to be CFOs? I mean, at the end of the day, it's, there was a lot of liability on the CFOs back in the day, right? Mm-hmm. Do I think, honestly, does it concern me 100%? But now I'm thinking like way future state, is it going to stop people from being CISOs? I don't think so.
I think it's gonna affect and change the compensation package and the dialogue prior to
in the legal contracts.
Yep. Yeah, I'd be looking at my insurance. In fact, I am looking at my insurance much more.
Yes.
With a finer scrutiny. I'm looking at what the liability is personally, professionally, and then your brand and reputation. And it's taken, if you're getting to the CISO level, you're 20 years probably with inside the industry. That's a long time to reestablish a brand and keep your name clean. If you've done it, then obviously that puts you at a risk that you have to consider that's not able to be compensated for.
There'll be a ton of conversations around directors and officers insurance, contracts with your organization. There's going to be a ton of conversation.
I want to go down the Sarbanes-Oxley path for a little bit, because I remember the days, right, prior to Sarbanes-Oxley and the requirements that came out. And if the SEC is listening, and they should be listening, what was the change that we made? We made the CEO and the CFO sign off on the financials. Mm-hmm. If we're going to do this right, if the SEC is going to come in and say, look, you need cybersecurity expertise on the board, we're going to get serious about cybersecurity, then you need to go down a similar path and say, Mr. CEO and Mr. CISO or Mrs., you now need to sign off on your security posture and put those signatures on the page. Because now those personal sign-offs, just like we did in Sarbanes-Oxley, sets the precedence for this. There hasn't been that precedent to this point, Jason, right?
That's right.
And if we're going to get serious about this is what I think the change needs to be. Because now what you're doing is you're elevating the CISO to a true C-suite executive position where things like D&O and compensation and all these other things need to align with your other executives at the CEO and the CFO level. And until that happens, there's a bit of a disconnect here that I think is going to be challenging for the industry.
It's exactly why I brought Sarbanes up. I brought it up because I hope this is the path that we're going toward, that same type of requirement and oversight, because that's where you're going to have good structure and good framework and good regulation to make sure, we're protected as CISOs, but also the accountability lies on the organization as well.
Well, and you had a point there. You have other executive signatures on that line with you. That scapegoat mentality and taking on that, I would say, professional liability for, maybe what you're getting into. You post breach and you're going to get fired 6 months later. You have a compensation package that reflects that. Yep. But if you remove that scapegoat mentality, then the organization then has to step up and actually do things in the proper order, and you don't have that kind of fallback guy.
Yeah. So
I'm not sure how much deeper this is going to get from a criminal perspective, but I would assume there are going to be other folks who start getting called to the table for this. I mean, as it gets deeper, I would assume more names are going to come out. I would hope.
Yeah. So I asked, because we had our CISO advisory board last week, and I asked some of the CISOs, I'm not going to name names, but I was just asking, like, does this concern you in your role? And a couple of them, there were some concerns, right? One of them, just off the record, was like, I document everything, right? Mm-hmm. So look, as a executive, I'm taking risk back to my leadership, and I'm doing it in writing and having them sign off in writing, right? Yeah. They're creating a paper trail for themselves to protect themselves. And I think it's a really good strategy because, you know, if something like this goes down, having kind of buy off from other executives like, nope, we're not going to accept that risk. Therefore, I'm not getting budget to fix that. You can't put that on me. You can't use the scapegoat against me. So I think the other thing CISOs really need to think about going forward is if you're not getting the compensation or you're not on the D&O and you feel like you're in a position, start getting written documentation around decisions that are being made to protect yourself because
100%.
Yeah.
That's been my strategy for a long time, and I bet you I can go back 20 years in my career of documentation that I have on a hard drive over here that I can go back to decisions that were made. I mean, I document the heck out of everything. It's just my nature. It's how I've always been. But absolutely right. You know, I take that for granted that I document everything. You know what? If you're in that leadership position and you have that level of accountability and responsibility on your plate, document every decision. Document everything.
Yes. Just to take some of the burden off of you.
Yeah.
And look, if things are going to come down, at least there's other people getting involved. And I think, Jason, you're right. I think we will see some other criminal investigations potentially around this, depending on what evidence they have. I'm not going to speculate. I wanted to really think about the change of the role. And what does that mean to aspiring CISOs and existing CISOs that don't have some of the protections? You know, what do they need to do, and what are the things they need to be thinking about as this role shifts and creates a little more of a target almost in some respects, right?
I mean, while it feels really great to have a handshake from the CEO saying, I'm donning you the CISO title and then a letter from HR, you need a little bit more paperwork than that when you're taking this role, right? So make sure you have a good contract in place. Make sure you have, you know, that level of directors and officers insurance in place, and, you know, just be smart with what you're doing.
Yeah. Protect yourself. Please protect yourself. I don't want to see many more of these stories because it kind of hurt last week just watching this unfold. I was just like, ugh. That's why I wanted to spend a little bit of time on it today because I just it just sets a precedent. I just don't think is positive for us right now. Right, we could use it for good. We can use it for good, right? We can use it to educate CISOs and aspiring CISOs to protect themselves. We can potentially use this to force some of the things like we did in Sarbanes-Oxley to put some better controls and sign-offs around security. We can use this for good.
And I think that's what we take out of this, right? Like I said in the earlier segment, disruption equals opportunity. Let's take advantage of this disruption and take advantage of the opportunity to change the way we're doing things, right? So, you know, if you're an aspiring CISO and you're sitting in front of a hiring board and they want to put that piece of paper in front of you, now's your time to negotiate. Have the right conversations.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there should be some interesting articles and or advice and or podcasts coming out, I think, kind of around like what do you actually do to protect yourself? What kind of things are you starting to look at? What insurance policies do you need to make sure you have in effect? Because you're going to have a kind of this next generation, especially as we start to see maybe early retirements or people stepping up in the organization, moving to advisory positions, all of those pieces. Some of the younger people that maybe aren't listening or paying attention to some of this, they're going to be taking these roles without some of those protections. And that puts them in a pretty vulnerable state for things like this in the future, especially with the precedents being set.
Yeah, I'm like curious, like for myself, right? I have an umbrella insurance policy. Like, do you need in these roles, do you need to take out more personal protection above and beyond a D&O policy, right? To protect you a little more at home on the home front. Like, are these things that you need to start thinking about? Now, I thought about it for other reasons, not because of work related stuff, but if you start if you get things coming at you personally from a criminal perspective. Like, how do you think about your personal insurance and policy structures? Holy cow! Like these are things that I think people need to think about.
Big time. I mean, you know what? I'm sitting there looking, and oh God, you know, looking at 8 years potential in prison as the top. That's, I mean, there's no insurance in the world that's going to make that better for me. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's the aspect that I'm sitting saying to myself, wow, you know what? Something needs to be done. We need to make some changes here because, you know, staring down the barrel of potential 8 years in prison.
Yeah. No. And the impact on families and other things. Like, like I said, like what other protections do you need to put in place personally? Just things to think about. And anybody who writes these stories with good tips, like send them to us. We will cover them on the show because I want to make sure people are getting access to those resources as needed.
Yeah, I look pretty good in orange. I mean, I'm not quite your guys' Broncos, but I don't like that kind of orange.
Nope.
No, I've been rooting for the Browns and the Broncos long enough. That's as orange as I want to get. I look much better in blue.
I agree.
Okay, let's move on. We can cover these last couple articles quickly. Successful leaders are great coaches. I thought this was a really interesting article. You know, one of the things I thought about, Jason, in retirement is going to coach high school football. You know, I have such a love for the sport. You know, I played it into my sophomore year. And when I saw this article, I'm like, ooh, maybe I can go coach high school football when I retire.
That's awesome. That's great. No, I mean, honestly, that's, you know, once you get to that level of leadership, we talk about it a lot. The pinnacle of leadership is that servant level leadership, where you're there to serve the folks who are on your team, who are working for you, for your organization. You know, I would also put out there that leadership is not confined to just your team. You can help lead other business units. You can help lead other organizations. You can help lead your customers, right? I mean, leadership is a mentality. It's a strategy. It's a practice, and lead everywhere you are, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you're there to be a leader and you're there to help people. Take that servant leadership to heart and really use it, right? So, yeah, that's part of being a coach, right? I've said it often. My job as a leader is to teach the folks who report to me how to put me out of a job so I can be on to my next best thing, right? So it's teaching, it's coaching, it's being there for them when they need you.
I think some of the interesting things in this article were kind of around the social tendencies of where we're shifting from, like the boomers and the different generations and the micro generations, even that leadership style and how that has evolved and changed. I think you'll see that in organizations very, very clearly as we start to move forward, like which ones are moving on. And I think we've actually kind of passed some of those points where we see a lot more coaching and leadership, not from a managing standpoint, but actual leadership. And there's nothing more, I would say, rewarding, but also time intensive and very difficult to get right, because you are dealing with people. You do this right, you're dealing with emotions and different personalities and really caring, which takes extra effort. You're not just leading an organization. You're not just dealing with technology and strategy. You're dealing with people. And once we get back to realizing what the psychology is and the relational side of people, that's when we actually start to make effects and change the culture within inside of an organization. Yeah,
and that's an important piece too. I mean, there's so many different generations right now in the workforce who, you know, they all are dealt with differently too. Right? Yeah, right. Different personalities, and if not now, more than ever, this is the time to get to know your personnel. Because if you know your audience, you're going to be able to work with them and deliver the right leadership style to them and be able to adapt your conversations to, you know, to those personalities. So, you know, I know a lot of leaders are concerned with the different personalities and different generations, but you want to know what? Now it's time to roll up your sleeves and learn, right? Learn what motivates those generations, learn what motivates those folks so you can adapt your leadership style to serve that portion of the workforce. It's about serving. Yeah. So in order to serve, you need to know your audience. So that means you need to learn.
Yeah. Well, I just love the acronym they came up with. Tyler, you touched on parts of it, but they created the COACH acronym, right? Care for your teammates. Organize them into their sweet spot. Align them around the organization's purpose and values. challenge them to their full potential, and help them reach their goals. I think it's a really great way to think about how to organize that coaching structure, right? It just ties in so beautifully. And it touches on a lot of the leadership discussions we've had around trust and communication and empathy, and all the things that make great leaders are also those same things that can help you through this coaching effort. It was just a great way to tie it. Yeah.
Yep.
That was great. Last article, we've got a couple minutes left, is the 7 cybersecurity audio books that you should listen to. Number 1 on the list, which we cover a lot of Harvard Business Review articles on this show. I think they do a great job with different leadership and communication structures. They actually have an audio podcast around cybersecurity. The Insights You Need from Harvard Business Review was one of the top ones on the list. And I thought that was really interesting because we cover just a ton of articles from them.
Yeah, I mean, I have 2 of the books. I've read 2 of the books, or listened to 2 of the books on audiobook. The program development for business, you know what that is? That's one that you purchase and you hand to your CFO, you hand to your CEO, you hand it to other business leaders within your organization. You give it to them for a holiday present or something like that, and say, here's how you can understand what I'm dealing with, because it's business centric, right? It's not technical. It's not getting in the weeds there. It's built for business executives to understand a security program, right? So great book, buy it, share it with executives within your organization so they can understand. I mean, it's not that old. It's from 2018, I believe, and it's great. And the other one I have is Project Zero Trust. I mean, that's one it's awesome, because at the end of the day, John Kindervad helped. He did the preface on it, the intro on it. He helped, with it. I mean, the article that came out in 2010 where Zero Trust was coined came from him, right?
Yep.
So, it's one of those scenarios where the root of Zero Trust, and we know it's been around for a long time now. The person who actually coined that phrase, if you read the book, you'll understand why, right? I mean, it's a great book, and take advantage of it. I mean, I know we've been talking about this for 12 years now or more. But it helps you understand the true meaning of Zero Trust and what it's really about.
Yes. Tyler, do you have any of these?
I've got 2 of them. I wouldn't have put them on my top 7 list. Most of the good ones that I have tended to gravitate towards tend to be around business and people, like understanding people, things like skin in the game, the subtle art of not giving a, whatever.
Yep.
Those ones where you're dealing with the psychology and understanding different people, and then adapting your insights and or your own personal behavior for betterment tend to provide more value to me in the cybersecurity space, as well as understanding, the art of humans so that you can manipulate them is also very important. So.
Yes. One of the reasons why I now work for Living Security, trying to fix some of those elements. So yes, there are some interesting human books out there, and why it's so hard to change human behavior. How do we do a better job of that? Because as we all know, it's the human that creates most of the issues for us from an incident perspective. So it's good to understand, what influences, what doesn't work, and hopefully we can get better. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.